Some interviews are meant to uplift, but what happens when the host has other plans? When a confident entrepreneur takes the hot seat, the conversation takes an unexpected turn that leaves everyone speechless. What happens next is something nobody saw coming. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. Maya Carter adjusted the microphone clip to her blazer and took a steadying breath. The bright studio lights beamed down on her, making the sleek emerald green suit she had carefully chosen shine just a little more. She wasn't nervous, not exactly. This was what she had worked for. Years of grinding, sacrificing, proving herself over and over again just to get to this moment. Yet there was something in the air, a subtle weight pressing on her chest. The producer had barely looked at her when she arrived, just ushered her toward a chair in the makeup room and mumbled something about timing. And then there was him, Ethan Hayes, the host of Business Now. Maya had watched his show before. He had a reputation. Some guests walked away with glowing interviews, their businesses uplifted to new heights after appearing on his platform. Others weren't so lucky. It all depended on whether he respected you, or at the very least saw you as someone who belonged. She had seen him tear into startup founders, mock ambitious entrepreneurs, and reduce industry experts to stumbling messes. But she wasn't just anyone. She had built Carter Tech Solutions from the ground up, turning it into one of the fastest-growing AI firms in the country. She belonged here. The stage manager gave her a quick nod, signaling her cue. She stepped onto the set, a smile poised effortlessly on her lips, shoulders squared. The audience clapped politely. And Ethan, sitting in his signature navy blue suit with a smirk playing on his lips, extended a hand. "Maya Carter, welcome," he said smoothly, his voice just a little too warm. "Thank you for having me," Maya responded, taking her seat. Ethan leaned back, tapping a stack of note cards against his knee as he surveyed her. "I have to say, Maya, your story is quite interesting. A self-taught entrepreneur in the tech industry? That's not something we see every day." There it was, the first jab. Subtle, but there. Maya didn't flinch. "Yes, I started from scratch. I taught myself to code while working 2 jobs. I built Carter Tech with no outside investment, and now we're operating in over 10 cities. Ethan nodded slowly, like he was processing something amusing. "Right. And yet the tech industry isn't exactly known for being welcoming to outsiders." Maya kept her expression neutral. She could feel the way the energy in the room shifted, how the words outsiders carried a meaning that Ethan wouldn't directly acknowledge, but she knew. The audience knew. "I wouldn't call myself an outsider," she replied smoothly. "I would say I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." A chuckle rippled through the crowd. Ethan raised an eyebrow, feigning amusement. "I like the confidence." He flipped to another card, glancing at it before looking back at her. "But confidence aside, let's talk about credibility. Carter Tech is making some bold claims about AI advancements, but you don't have a background in engineering, no formal education in computer science. Some critics might say, you're in over your head." Maya tilted her head slightly, a slow smile forming. "And yet, despite that, we've outperformed 3 major firms in predictive analytics, landed exclusive contracts, and secured top talent from companies that do have those traditional backgrounds. So, if I'm in over my head, it's interesting how we keep winning." The audience let out a few murmurs of approval. Ethan's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance. "Sure," he said, waving a hand, "but let's be real here. The world of serious business, the kind that drives the economy, is usually led by people with degrees from places like Harvard or MIT, with networks built from the ground up. You don't have that. So how do you expect to compete at the highest level when you're up against people who have been in these spaces for generations?" Maya folded her hands in her lap, meeting his gaze head-on. She knew this game. She had played it before. I see what you're asking, she said, her voice even. You want to know how without generational wealth, without a powerful last name, without the proper pedigree, managed to succeed in a field that wasn't built for people like me. The room went dead silence. Ethan's jaw tensed just for a second. He forced a chuckle. That's... Maya leaned forward slightly, cutting him off. The answer is simple. I had to be better than them, and I had to work twice as hard just to get a fraction of the recognition. A few snaps sounded from the audience. Someone murmured, "Talk about it." Ethan cleared his throat, trying to regain control. I'm sure many would argue that the playing field is more balanced than it used to be. I mean, look at where you are now. Maya gave a small nod. True, but let's not act like that happened by accident. I got here in spite of the system, not because of it. Ethan glanced at his producer off camera. Something about the interview wasn't going the way he had planned. He flipped to another note card, searching for a new angle. Well, let's shift gears, he said, forcing a laugh. Your company has been getting a lot of attention. Some have even called Carter Tech the next big thing. But critics argue that your success might just be hype. They say without a proven track record in the industry, this could all be a bubble waiting to burst. Maya exhaled slowly, her smile never fading. She had dealt with this before, the doubt, the constant need to prove herself in ways that others never had to. That's a fair opinion, she said. But here's what I know. Hype doesn't generate revenue, and yet we've been profitable since year one. Hype doesn't create real-world solutions, and yet our technology is currently being used in hospitals to predict patient deterioration before it happens. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Maya wasn't done. Hype doesn't sustain a company, but strategy, innovation, and results do, and we have all three. The applause that followed wasn't just polite this time. It was real, strong. For the first time since the interview started, Ethan didn't have a rebuttal ready. His expression faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Maya saw it, the audience saw it, and somewhere beyond this studio, millions of people watching at home would see it too. The applause from the audience still lingered in the air, but Ethan Hayes was already shifting in his seat, forcing a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maya Carter sat poised, hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She wasn't rattled, not even a little. If anything, the energy in the room had tilted in her favor, and Ethan knew it. He cleared his throat, forcing an easy chuckle. Well, Maya, I have to say, you certainly know how to handle tough questions. She tilted her head slightly, giving him a smooth, polite smile. I've had plenty of practice. The audience chuckled, a few voices murmuring their approval. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk, as if trying to reclaim control of the conversation. But let's talk about scalability, he said, shifting gears. A lot of small companies, especially those built around a single founder, tend to hit a ceiling. They can only grow so far before they either plateau or get absorbed by a bigger company. Some critics are saying Carter Tech is a boutique firm. Successful, sure, but nowhere near the level of the big players. So the question is, what's the real plan here? Are you looking to stay independent, or is the goal to sell while you still have momentum? Maya didn't blink. That's an interesting way to frame the question. You assume that staying independent isn't a viable option, as if the only real success comes from being absorbed into someone else's empire. Ethan let out a dry laugh. Well, let's be honest, Maya. In the tech industry, consolidation is the game. The biggest names, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, they all either buy out their competition or crush them. It's how the industry works. You don't think Carter Tech is small enough to get swallowed up? Maya's smile didn't waver. Ethan, you're thinking like someone who's used to watching others play defense. I don't run my company to be swallowed. I run it to compete. A few audience members clapped, and Ethan's jaw twitched. He flipped through his cue cards again, his fingers tightening around the stack. He wasn't used to guests pushing back so effortlessly, especially not with the confidence Maya carried. "All right, let's talk about leadership," he said, pivoting yet again. "We've seen a lot of fast-growing companies struggle because their founders, especially ones without traditional business backgrounds, don't know when to step aside. Running a startup and running a billion-dollar company are two very different things. Have you considered bringing in more experienced leadership to help you navigate the next level?" Maya exhaled slowly, her fingers tapping lightly against her knee. "You mean, have I considered handing over the reins to someone who fits the mold better?" Ethan chuckled. "I mean, someone who has the kind of experience you don't." Maya nodded, as if considering his words. "You know, it's funny, every time a black entrepreneur builds something groundbreaking, there's always this assumption that they need to step aside at some point, that their success is temporary unless someone more traditional takes over. But when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook in his dorm room with no business experience, nobody asked him if he was qualified to run it. When Elon Musk was building his companies, nobody suggested he step aside for someone more experienced. They were just visionaries. Why do you think that is?" The question hung in the air, sharp and heavy. The audience murmured again, this time louder. Even the producer, watching from the sidelines, looked slightly uneasy. Ethan let out another forced chuckle, shaking his head. "Maya, come on, that's not what I'm saying." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it?" Ethan exhaled through his nose, his fingers pressing into the desk. "Look, I'm just saying that to run a massive company there are certain skills, and I'm saying that if I were a white man sitting in this chair, you wouldn't be asking me if I plan to hand over my own company just to make people more comfortable." The audience erupted. A few people clapped, others cheered. Someone even let out a "say that again" from the back. Ethan's expression faltered. It was subtle, but Maya saw it. He felt that one. He quickly forced a smile, shaking his head. "Maya, I have nothing but respect for what you've built." "I don't need respect, Ethan," she said calmly. "I need you to acknowledge that the way you frame questions like these reveals the bias in the industry." Ethan was scrambling now, flipping through his notes, looking for anything to regain control of the moment. He could feel it slipping through his fingers, and so could everyone watching. "Well," he finally said, forcing an easygoing laugh, "you're clearly passionate about this, but let's step away from the controversy for a second." He leaned forward, as if attempting to shift the mood. "Let's talk about your story. A lot of people might not know this, but you actually started your company while working a full-time job. That's quite the leap. What made you take that risk?" Amir leaned back slightly, recognizing the move. He was trying to soften the conversation, to pivot back to safe ground, but she wasn't about to let him rewrite the energy in the room. "It wasn't a risk," she said simply. "It was a necessity." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Necessity?" Maya nodded. "See, some people start companies because they have a safety net. If it fails, they have connections, investors, family money. But I didn't have that. I had bills, I had responsibilities. I had to make it work because failure wasn't an option. So, no, it wasn't about taking a risk. It was about building something that couldn't be taken away from me." The room was dead silent. Ethan sat back slightly, lips pressing together. This wasn't going how he wanted. He was losing. Maya glanced toward the cameras, fully aware of how this interview was going to play online. She could already picture the headlines. "Ethan Hayes tries to undermine Maya Carter and fails spectacularly." Maya Carter just schooled, Business Now's host on live TV. She wasn't playing his game. She was playing hers. Ethan licked his lips, trying to regain his composure. "Well, Maya, I think it's safe to say you're—" She didn't let him finish. "Ethan, let me ask you something," she said smoothly, her voice calm but undeniably powerful. "When was the last time you had to prove you belonged somewhere?" Ethan opened his mouth, paused. The audience watched. The cameras rolled, and for the first time in his career, Ethan Hayes had nothing to say. Ethan Hayes hesitated. It was a fleeting pause, but just long enough for the audience to feel it. The smooth, ever-confident host of business now had finally encountered a question he wasn't prepared to answer. His mouth opened slightly, a response hanging somewhere in the air, but the weight of Maya's words had already settled over the room. Maya Carter sat poised, her hands still folded in her lap, not rushing to fill the silence. She let it sit, let the cameras drink in the moment, let the audience absorb what had just happened. And then the crowd reacted. Not just polite murmurs. A wave of claps and approving voices rolled through the studio, some people even giving low whistles at the sheer audacity of what had just taken place. Maya didn't have to say anything else. The audience already understood the power shift. Ethan inhaled sharply, exhaled through his nose, and forced a tight smile. "That's a good question," he finally said, gripping his cue cards as though they might anchor him back into control. "But I think we both know this interview is about you, Maya." She raised a brow, still calm. "It is, and that's exactly why I asked." The audience laughed, not with Ethan, but at him. Ethan's fingers flexed around his cue cards again. He flipped to another question, but it was clear now that the balance had tilted. No matter what he threw at her, Maya wasn't reacting. She was leading. "Well," he said, chuckling dryly, "this certainly isn't the direction I expected this conversation to take." Maya gave a slow nod. "Because you expected to frame the conversation, and I was supposed to follow along." He shook his head, letting out a forced laugh. "Come on now, Maya. Let's not make this adversarial." She smiled. "You did that already." The audience erupted again, this time even louder. Ethan's smile twitched at the edges, but he fought to keep it in place. His show was live. There was no editing, no way to cut this down before it hit the internet, and Maya knew it. He flipped another card, deciding to push forward. "All right, let's talk about the future," he said, trying to steer things back to safer ground. "You're making big moves in the AI space. But there are still skeptics who say AI is just a bubble, and that Carter Tech could be riding a trend that might not last. What do you say to people who think you're just another startup chasing hype?" Maya leaned forward slightly, clasping her hands. "I say those people don't understand how innovation works." Ethan chuckled again, but it was weaker this time. "That's a bold statement." Maya nodded. "It is. But so is assuming that every black entrepreneur's success is a temporary accident." The audience let out a collective gasp. Ethan's expression flickered, just for a second. He wasn't expecting her to go there. Maya continued, her tone measured, deliberate. "See, when a white man starts a company in his garage, people call him a visionary. They write articles about his genius even before his company proves anything. But when someone like me does it, suddenly the question is, how long will this last? Or, will she sell it before it collapses?" She tilted her head slightly. "Why do you think that is, Ethan?" Ethan sat stiffly in his chair. His usual confidence had fractured. He was scrambling now, not just for control, but for footing in a conversation that had turned into something much bigger than he had anticipated. He cleared his throat, shifting slightly. "Well, I wouldn't say—" "I know you wouldn't," Maya interrupted smoothly, her voice unwavering. "That's exactly the point." Laughter roared through the audience, mixed with applause. A few people even stood up, clapping. Ethan clenched his jaw but forced another tight smile. "Well, Maya," he said, exhaling sharply, "I think it's clear that you're very passionate about this." Maya gave a small shrug. "Passionate, sure, but more than that." "I'm prepared." The audience's reaction was instant. Loud claps, murmurs of "damn, she's killing this," and the sound of some people snapping their fingers in support. Ethan was losing. And the worst part? He knew it. He straightened his posture, gripping his stack of cards again. "Look, I don't want to make this interview seem confrontational. That's not what we do here at Business Now. Maya raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I've watched this show before. You like to challenge people, you like to dig, you like to press. She folded her arms. It's just different when the person pushing back is me, isn't it? Silence. Thick, undeniable silence. The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the tension in Ethan's expression. The audience held their breath, waiting. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, licked his lips. Then he laughed. Too forced, too hollow. You're really good at this, Maya. I know, she replied instantly. The crowd lost it. The studio audience was no longer just watching. They were witnessing. And then it happened. One voice, buried somewhere in the crowd, shouted, "Somebody clip that!" Another followed, "That's going viral." And just like that, the entire energy in the studio shifted. Ethan knew. Maya knew. The producers knew. This wasn't just an interview anymore. This was a moment, the kind that the internet would devour. Ethan adjusted his tie, pretending to look at his notes, but it was obvious there was nowhere left to go. Maya had done something no one on his show had ever done before. She turned his own format against him, flipped the script, and put him on defense. He finally let out a slow exhale. "Well, Maya, I think this is probably a good place to wrap things up." Maya sat back, crossing her legs. "Probably for the best." The audience laughed. Some clapped. The producer motioned from the side of the stage, signaling to cut to commercial. Ethan forced one final smile. "Maya Carter, everyone." The audience erupted in applause. But as Maya stood, she knew that the biggest reaction wasn't happening in the studio. It was happening online. Because by the time she walked off that stage, the clips were already spreading like wildfire. The second Maya stepped off the stage, she felt it. The air was different. The way the producers and crew looked at her wasn't the same as when she had walked in. Before, they were indifferent, barely acknowledging her presence beyond the routine formalities of any other guest. Now, some of them avoided her gaze entirely, while others gave her quick, knowing glances. Respect, recognition, a hint of fear. She had won. As she made her way down the hall, her phone vibrated relentlessly in her pocket. She didn't even need to check. She already knew. She reached the green room, closed the door behind her, and let out a slow, steady breath. Pulling out her phone, she finally looked. Hundreds of notifications. Texts. Mentions. Retweets. Video clips. The moment was already out there, spreading across every platform like wildfire. One of the first messages she saw was from her best friend, Ava. Girl, you broke him. The internet is losing it." Maya smirked, scrolling through the messages. Another text popped up. Her business partner, James. "You just gave a TED Talk on live TV. Investors are going to be tripping over themselves to call you." Her phone buzzed again, a voice memo from her younger brother, Elijah. She hit play. "Yo, Maya, you really made that man reconsider his life choices on national television. I'm crying. Mom called me just to scream into the phone." "Proud of you, sis." Maya chuckled, shaking her head. She barely had time to react before another alert came in, this time from Twitter. Maya Carter Unbothered was trending. She clicked the hashtag and saw the flood of clips, memes, and reactions. One video, already at 500,000 views, showed her staring down Ethan Hayes. Captioned, "That's exactly the point. Iconic." Another clip had been slowed down for effect, highlighting the exact moment Ethan lost control of the interview, with dramatic music playing in the background. The caption? "The moment he realized he faked up." She scrolled further, seeing commentary from public figures, business leaders, even celebrities. One tweet stood out. At "The Real Tyler Mills, CEO, Mills Tech Ventures. Maya Carter just gave a masterclass in confidence and strategy. Carter Tech's future just skyrocketed. Let's talk. At Maya Carter AI. Maya stopped. Tyler Mills? The Tyler Mills? She barely had time to process it before another notification hit. An email. Subject. Exclusive offer. She clicked. Dear Miss Carter, we at Bloomberg would love to schedule an exclusive follow-up interview with you to discuss your business, your approach to leadership, and your experience on Business Now. Your insights have resonated with millions, and we believe our audience would love to hear more. Looking forward to your response. Best, David Langston. Senior Producer, Bloomberg Business. Maya exhaled. It wasn't just viral, it was bigger than that. A knock at the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She turned as it opened slightly, and there stood Ethan Hayes himself. For the first time in the entire interview process, he looked off balance. Not the polished, confident host of Business Now, but a man who had just walked straight into a public relations nightmare. Maya crossed her arms, waiting. Ethan cleared his throat, stepping inside cautiously. Maya. She raised an eyebrow. Ethan. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. That was quite the conversation. She gave him a neutral look. Was it? His lips twitched. He knew what she was doing. He also knew he had no power here anymore. I just wanted to say, he said, hesitating slightly, that I hope there's no hard feelings. Maya let the words hang in the air before responding. Hard feelings? She let out a small chuckle. Ethan, this was business. That's what you tell people, right? It's just business. Ethan hesitated. His usual smugness was gone, replaced with unease. Look, I'll admit I may have underestimated you. Mayer tilted her head slightly. You did. He swallowed. I won't make that mistake again. Maya smiled, but there was nothing soft about it. No, Ethan, you won't. He nodded, as if finally accepting the new reality. Without another word, he turned and left. The second the door shut, Maya let out a deep breath, not because she was relieved, but because she knew this was only the beginning. She glanced down at her phone again, the notifications still rolling in. Carter Tech had just become a movement, and she was about to take it all the way to the top.